It was a quiet evening in the small suburban town, but behind closed doors, two teenage boys were planning something that would shatter the peace forever. Max and Ethan were the epitome of perfection in their small, tight-knit community. The kind of boys who always had a smile, always held the door open, and never spoke out of turn. They were best friends, practically inseparable since they met in the first grade. The neighbors loved them, the teachers adored them, and their mothers, well, they were the proudest mothers in town. Max was a bit of a bookworm, with glasses that always slid down his nose. He had a soft-spoken charm, a way of making everyone feel comfortable. His mother, Linda, often boasted about how kind and considerate he was. Linda was a single mother, who doted on Max, her only child, with all her love and attention. Max was her world, and she made sure everyone knew it. Ethan, on the other hand, was the athlete. He was tall, muscular, and had a smile that could light up a room. His mother, Karen, was his biggest cheerleader, attending every game, every practice, and every event with a camera in hand. Ethan's father had passed away when he was young, leaving Karen to raise him on her own. She poured all her energy into Ethan, molding him into the perfect son. Together, Max and Ethan seemed like the golden boys of the town. But beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. Max and Ethan shared a secret, one that they had hidden from everyone, including their mothers. They were more than just best friends, they were in love. In their conservative town, being gay wasn't just frowned upon, it was condemned. The boys knew that coming out would ruin everything, their reputations, their families, and their future. Their love was intense, consuming, and dangerous. It was the kind of love that made them do things they never thought they were capable of. They started sneaking out at night, meeting in secret places where no one would find them. They shared whispered promises and planned a future together, far away from the town that would never accept them. But the pressure of keeping their relationship a secret began to take a toll. Max's mother, Linda, was growing suspicious. She noticed how often Max and Ethan were together, how they seemed to share a connection that went beyond friendship. Linda was a woman with strong religious beliefs, and the idea that her son might be gay was something she couldn't accept. Ethan's mother, Karen, was also starting to notice the changes in her son. He was more distant, less focused on his sports, and seemed to be hiding something. Karen was the type of mother who demanded perfection, and anything less was unacceptable. The thought that Ethan might be gay was something she wouldn't tolerate. One evening, after another tense dinner with his mother, Max snapped. Linda had been questioning him about his relationship with Ethan, pushing him to confess something that he wasn't ready to admit. Max felt trapped, suffocated by his mother's constant pressure, and her unwillingness to accept him for who he was. After the argument, Max called Ethan, his voice shaking with anger and frustration. "I can't take it anymore," he said, his words barely a whisper. "She's never going to let me be who I am. She's never going to accept us." Ethan, who had been dealing with his own issues at home, felt the same way. Karen had been relentless, criticizing him for spending too much time with Max and not enough time focusing on his sports. She had even started making comments about how close the two boys were, suggesting that their relationship was unnatural. The boys knew that they couldn't go on like this. They couldn't keep living in fear, hiding their love from the world. They decided that something had to be done, something drastic, something that would free them from their mother's control. And so, the plan was born. The boys spent weeks planning every detail. They knew their mother's schedules, their routines, and their weaknesses. They talked about the plan in hushed tones, meeting in secluded places where no one could overhear them. They became obsessed, consumed by the idea that this was the only way they could be together. Max suggested that they make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He had read enough crime novels to know how to cover their tracks, how to make sure that no one would suspect them. Ethan, who was stronger and more physically capable, would carry out the attack, while Max would handle the details, the alibi, the cleanup, the cover-up. They practiced, rehearsing every step of the plan until they were confident that nothing could go wrong. They knew that once they went through with it, there was no turning back. But the thought of finally being free, of being able to love each other without fear, was too tempting to resist. The night of the murder was cold and dark, with a thick fog that hung in the air like a shroud. It was the perfect cover for what they were about to do. Max and Ethan met at their usual spot, their faces pale and their hands trembling with anticipation. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Max nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to do this. It's the only way." They waited until their mothers were asleep, the house quiet and still. Max slipped into his mother's room first, standing over her as she slept, his heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the pillow he planned to use to smother her. But then he thought about all the times she had made him feel small, made him feel like he was less than, made him feel like he had to hide who he was. The anger surged inside him, and he pressed the pillow down with all his strength, his mother's muffled cries barely making a sound. Ethan, meanwhile, had entered his mother's room with a kitchen knife in hand. He had always been strong, but this was different. This was personal. As he raised the knife, he thought about all the times his mother had belittled him, criticized him, and tried to control him. He thought about how she would never accept him for who he was. With a swift motion, he plunged the knife into her chest, over and over, until she stopped moving. The boys met outside after it was done, their clothes stained with blood, their faces pale and hollow. They didn't speak, didn't need to. They knew what they had done, and they knew there was no going back. They cleaned up as best they could, wiping down surfaces, disposing of evidence, and making sure there were no traces left behind. They knew that they had to act normal, had to pretend like nothing had happened. The next day, the town was in shock. The news of the brutal murders spread quickly, and the small community was left reeling. The police were called, investigations were launched, and the boys played their parts perfectly. They cried, they mourned, they comforted each other, all while knowing that they had just committed the unthinkable. But as the days passed, the guilt began to eat away at them. Max couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything other than what he had done. Ethan tried to push it down, tried to focus on the future they had planned, but the weight of their actions was too much to bear. The boys began to turn on each other, the pressure of keeping their secret tearing them apart. They argued, they fought, and soon their love, the very thing that had driven them to commit the murders, began to crumble. It was Max who broke first. He couldn't take it anymore, the guilt eating away at him until he felt like he was losing his mind. He went to the police, his hands shaking, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "I need to confess," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I killed my mother." The police were stunned, but they listened as Max told them everything, the plan, the motive, the murder. He didn't hold back, didn't try to protect Ethan. He just wanted it to be over. Ethan was arrested shortly after, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. He had trusted Max, had believed that they could get away with it, but now, everything was falling apart. The trial was swift and brutal. The town that had once loved and admired the boys now looked at them with disgust and hatred. The details of the murders, the cold, calculated way they had been carried out, shocked everyone. The boys' relationship was laid bare for the world to see, their love twisted into something dark and horrifying. The prosecution painted them as monsters, driven by a perverse love that had led them to commit the ultimate sin. Max and Ethan were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Their love, the very thing that had once been their greatest strength, was now their downfall. Max and Ethan were sent to separate prisons, their love story ending in the most tragic way possible. They were left to live with the consequences of their actions, their once bright future now nothing more than a distant memory. In the small town, life went on, but the memory of the murders lingered like a dark cloud. The once perfect sons were now a cautionary tale, a reminder of how love, when twisted by fear and hate, can lead to the darkest of places. Max spent his days in a cold, gray cell, replaying the events of that night over and over in his mind. He thought about his mother, about Ethan, about how everything had gone so wrong. He wondered if things could have been different if they had been brave enough to face the truth, to live their lives openly, without fear. Ethan, in his own prison cell, tried to block out the memories, to focus on surviving each day. But the guilt was always there, a constant reminder of what they had done. He thought about Max, about the love they had shared, and about how it had all been destroyed by one terrible act. The story of Max and Ethan became a legend in the town, a story told to warn others of the dangers of letting fear and hatred control your life. It was a story of love turned dark, of how two boys who were once so full of potential had thrown it all away in a moment of madness. But for Max and Ethan, the story wasn't over. They lived on, trapped in the prisons of their own making, haunted by the ghosts of the mothers they had once loved. Years passed, and Max and Ethan settled into the routine of prison life. The days blended together, marked by the monotony of meals, chores, and isolation. But neither could escape the shadows of their past, the memories of what they had done clinging to them like a second skin. Max, once the quiet, thoughtful boy, now spent most of his time in his cell, reading books to escape reality. But no matter how many pages he turned, he couldn't outrun his thoughts. The image of his mother's face in those final moments haunted him, a constant reminder of the monster he had become. He found solace in writing letters to his mother, letters to Ethan, and letters to himself. But he never sent them. They were his way of trying to make sense of the chaos in his mind, of trying to find some semblance of peace. He wrote about the guilt, the regret, and the twisted love that had driven him to murder. But no matter how much he wrote, the pain never lessened. Ethan, on the other hand, tried to bury his guilt under a tough exterior. He joined a prison gang, seeking protection and a sense of belonging in a world where weakness was a death sentence. But even in the company of hardened criminals, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. He was just a scared boy who had made a terrible mistake, and no amount of bravado could change that. Every night, when the prison lights dimmed, Ethan would lie in his bunk and think about Max. He wondered if Max hated him for dragging him into this mess, or if he missed him as much as Ethan missed him. But pride kept him from reaching out, from admitting that he was struggling just as much. It was a letter that finally broke the silence between them, a letter from Max that arrived unexpectedly, smuggled through a mutual contact. Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, the familiar handwriting bringing back a flood of memories. Dear Ethan, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I had to try. I can't stop thinking about what we did, about how everything went so wrong. I keep wondering if there was another way, if we could have found a way to be together without all the lies and the bloodshed. I miss you. I miss the way things were before, when it was just us against the world. But I know that we can never go back. We're not those boys anymore, and maybe we never really were. I'm trying to make peace with what we did, but it's hard. Every day, I wake up and wonder if today will be the day I finally forgive myself. But that day hasn't come yet. I don't know what's next for us, Ethan. Maybe this is where our story ends, or maybe there's still something left for us to find. All I know is that I'm tired of running from the truth. I'm tired of pretending that I'm okay. I hope you're doing better than I am. And if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'm here. Take care, Max. Ethan read the letter over and over, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to reconnect with the one person who understood him, the one person who shared his pain. That night, Ethan wrote back, pouring out everything he had kept bottled up inside. He wrote about the nightmares, the loneliness, and the guilt that gnawed at him every day. He wrote about how much he missed Max, how he wished they could go back to the days when they were just two boys in love, before everything went so wrong. Over the next few months, the letters between Max and Ethan became a lifeline for both of them. They shared their fears, their regrets, and their dreams for the future, however uncertain that future might be. Slowly, they began to heal, finding comfort in the knowledge that they weren't alone. The letters helped them confront the reality of their actions, to acknowledge the pain they had caused and to take responsibility for their choices. They didn't make excuses for what they had done, but they also didn't let their guilt consume them. Instead, they focused on the possibility of redemption, on the idea that they could still find a way to atone for their sins.